No, it's not my normal music, and as you are well aware, I'm not a normal person. The guest today is not normal either, but in a much different way. Let's say abnormal, or maybe a better word is extraordinary. This tune is called There She Goes, and it really sets the stage for the story you're about to hear. To me, this music makes me imagine a Wild West hero gunslinger walking out of a town that was just rid of the bad guys, or maybe the background music for any of us who have felt like we have conquered one thing to move on to the next. Most of us in this trade have traveled around the country to and fro, searching for more money, a better life, or maybe just running from our problems. I must admit I'm guilty of all of the above to some extent. The guest today has also traveled near and far, but not seeking the easy way like some of us, but in almost every single transition in her life has sought out unknown territory. And not that easier way, mind you, but in most cases has always sought out the unproven and unexplored. She has pretty much blazed her own trail wherever she wanted to, you might say. You know, podcasters are fortunate in that we have a platform to tell our story or to share our views to thousands of listeners. With my podcast, I've tried to make a conscientious effort to tell other people's stories, and with that, I take that opportunity very seriously. Today is no different. She and I sat and chatted for almost 2 hours, and we chased every rabbit and squirrel with every topic that came up. Her story deserves to be true and accurate, and to say this one was a challenge to edit is an understatement. Most of us run towards what we think is the better life, greener pastures, and sometimes what we think is the easier way to do less and earn more. My next guest shares her story of adventure and proof she was tough and smart enough to turn every adversity into triumph. She's truly a great American success story that we can learn a little or a lot from. So here's my new friend, Leigh Coates, and There She Goes. Today I'm with Leigh Coates. As most of the listeners know, Leigh, I'm a stalker on Instagram, so I'm always looking for different things on Instagram to post. And in our business, utility business, for whatever reason, and I can tell you that ever since I was a kid and all the folks I know, that if there's a helicopter anywhere around, all eyes are in the sky. Helicopters are big in our business, and mainly on the West Coast. Here in the East Coast, we've started to use them more. So I went to #UtilityPilot and I found a clip that you had put on there. And so I go to your page and I find you're not just a helicopter pilot, but there was this fantastic story behind this lady that I saw. And Leigh, you're in Alaska, is that right?
Correct. Yes, I'm in Alaska.
So what part of Alaska are you in?
It's a little town called Valdez, and we're on the road system, but it's only about 2,500 people that live here, so it's a pretty remote town. It takes about 5 hours to drive to the big city, or fly a helicopter takes an hour. And we used to have a commercial airline. COVID wiped them out, unfortunately. So, yeah, you used to be able to fly in once a day, sometimes twice a day on a 35-minute flight from the big city. But yeah, pretty remote.
Well, I looked this up. You are 3,677 miles away from me in Orlando, which actually puts you the farthest person I've ever talked to on this podcast, just so you know.
Well, that's quite an honor.
So your 4 hours time difference, a little after 7 p.m. here. It's a little after 3 there.
Yes. I'm trying not to pay attention to what time it is these days, but yeah, it's about that.
Don't rub it in. We'll get into that in just a little bit. So I'm here in Orlando. It's about 90 degrees. I talked to somebody in Canada here a few months ago, and they were telling me what the temp was. Of course, I had to Google it because they gave it in Celsius. But what's the temp where you're at now? What is it, in the 50s, 60s now there, or is it warmer?
No, 40s, 50s. It's cooling off quickly, too. We're getting the fall colors starting. We've had our first, what we call termination dust, which is the little sprinkling of snow on the higher elevations. It is definitely not Orlando temperatures.
You ever been to Florida?
I have. I cruised down through Florida on the back of a Harley Road King. I did 11,000 miles of a road trip on a Harley. And we went through Florida, went down to the southernmost point. Lots of love bugs. That was in the springtime. So I experienced love bugs.
Oh, yeah. You must have been April or May.
Yeah, I think it was May, and they are sticky.
Yeah, they're horrible. If you get them on the front of your car, if you don't get them off quickly, the paint comes right off of the front of the car. If you haven't been here, don't come in April or May if you're driving.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. And the torrential downpours were amazing. And on a motorcycle, we'd have to find a space really quick to drive underneath and stay for, 10 minutes while it goes by. Yeah, it was wild. I really liked Florida, though.
I like Florida November through March. It's very nice compared to what the weather the rest of the country is. We're kind of on the edge of where the cold weather dips down to, it gets pretty chilly here in Orlando for a couple days a year, like in the, high 30s. It may drop 34 and, it warms back up in a few days. You get south of here and it's, in Miami, it's 70s, 80s almost all year. It's very nice. But it does get old. When you start talking about the fall and the leaves changing, that's one thing, having grown up in Tennessee, that I do miss.
That nostalgic feeling. Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, the college football season, and we don't get that here, honestly, but it's fine. A lot of people would be very envious of you, and I think a lot of people are envious of people that are successful. And as we chatted before we started here, I think a lot of folks would be very envious of where you've ended up, but may not be as envious if they know the whole story. I think that a lot of people, they're jealous of where people are, but they don't realize the path, the life that it took to get them there, and some of the sacrifices that they've made. And I wanted to go into that a little bit today because you pointed me to another podcast that had asked you some questions. I was just glued to my phone listening to it. I was more excited about having you on after I listened to it. And I told you before we got on, I was even nervous before I hit the record button because I don't want to screw this up, because I feel like you've got a great story, and I want to make sure that I give it its due here.
Oh, thank you, Kenny.
Yep. Tell me a little bit about Leigh. You live in Alaska now, but you weren't born there. So tell me where you were born and a little bit about growing up.
I've got kind of a long story there, but to your point, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And so I understand what you're saying with envy, but honestly, if it was something easy to do, everybody would be doing it. It was hard work to get here from day one. I think there's a little bit of luck involved, but I think we make our own luck. To start out, I was actually born in Mexico. I don't know if you heard that or not, but
I did. In a commune. Don't leave that part out, because you said that part. See, I listen. I pay attention.
So yeah, I was a child of the 70s, and there was a lot of alternative living going on at that point. My parents are both American, but they were living in Mexico and in a commune, and I happened to be born into that commune. My little brother was born in Belize. We kind of moved around. We lived in Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and then we moved to the States when I was, maybe 4 or 5. Maryland was the first place that we lived, and then Southern California. Parents split. I ended up going with my dad to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then lived there for, 8 years or so, which was a really cool spot to spend some of my younger years. I think it's even cooler as an adult to go back and visit it. After that, ended up back in Southern California. I know you spent some time in California. And as you said, most of the Californians never leave because it's such a great spot to be. But yeah,
right. Weather's nice. What part in Southern Cal were you?
A little place called Malibu Lake. And it's Malibou, not to be confused with Malibu, the beach, but it's very close. So it's in the hills of Malibu. And it's just the most amazing little magical kind of a retreat place that people actually live. And back in the day, it used to be way off the beaten path, but now with the suburbs kind of sprawling, it's near the city, I should say. When I was 15, my mom met my stepdad, and he had a private pilot's license, and he took me for my very first flight in an airplane, and it was just the most magical feeling. I couldn't believe that I could be floating up above the world and be able to look down, and it was so magical. It just really got me that from day one. And he was really encouraging and said, "Oh, you're really good at this." And I took that to heart. So when I was 16, I actually started taking flying lessons, worked 3 jobs, and I rented a Cessna 150, which is a little tiny airplane, and I worked on my pilot's license. I look back now at my logbooks and I realize that I was only flying once or twice a month, but that's what I could afford at the time. During that time, I was like, I wonder if my grandfather would help me with flying lessons. He was the only person in our family that had any amount of money that might be able to help me. I called him up and I got all excited to have this big meeting and a big proposal to my grandfather, and I sat down with him and told him that I was really interested in flying and I wanted to be a commercial airline pilot, and asked if he would help me financially. He was so stoic, and he was just like, "You know what? I'm really proud of you, young lady. I think that's a great plan, and I think you'll feel so much better about it if you do it on your own." And here I was 16 years old, and it was really expensive for me at the time, and I was very upset. But I look back on it now and I'm so grateful. During high school, I worked 3 jobs and I made it happen. And I put in the hard work to actually be able to pay for my flying lessons.
Tell the listeners one of the jobs you worked about the bolts and the nuts.
So I would have to pull out, I think, 3 bolts, 3 nuts, and 2 sets of washers. put those in a bag and then in a sealer. It was a little plastic bag and a sealer. For every bag, I got 3 cents. And it was just the most monotonous work. And we'd be sitting around. There was other people doing it with me. So it would be like 3 or 4 of us, and we'd just be sitting there talking and counting out nuts and bolts, 3 cents a pop. That's what paid the bills. That's what paid the flying lessons.
You were probably a great friend. They loved to come over to your house because you were so entertaining. Ask them to come over and help you work. That was probably fun.
Right? I wish I could get my friends to help do that, but no, they would lose interest in 2 seconds. After I graduated high school, I still didn't have my pilot's license. I was still working towards it, and my dad lived in New Mexico, and he offered to let me live with him for free, and then he would match whatever I was paying towards my flight lessons. And I think I had maybe another 10 hours to go before I could get my license. And so I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, got my license, finished it, actually started on my next rating, which is the instrument rating. And then winter came. I was working in a restaurant that actually owned a ski snowboard shop. I ended up going out snowboarding with some friends for the first time. And all of a sudden I fell in love with snowboarding. Just like I had fallen in love with flying, it was now snowboarding. Wintertime, there really wasn't much flying going on anyway. So I ended up spending all of my flying money on snowboarding every single day. So every day I went to the ski basin and bought a ticket. But that only lasted 2 weeks, and then I was out of money, and my friend said, well, you should get a job as a snowboard instructor. And I'm like, I'm not sure I could even pass interview if I have to actually snowboard. But this was really early on in the days of snowboarding, and somehow I got a job as a snowboard instructor.
Oh, wow.
And
after snowboarding for
2 weeks.
Nice.
But that gave me my season pass, so I no longer had to spend money on the snowboarding, but I got to go every day. That became my new passion, and I actually forgot about flying for 13 years because I got really obsessed with snowboarding. Wherever the snow was, I went. So in the wintertime, I spent a couple seasons in Colorado, New Mexico, Squaw Valley, Lake Tahoe, and then in the summer seasons, I would go to New Zealand for their winter, which is our summer, opposite hemisphere. I did that, 4 times in a row, so I was just back to back to back to back winter. Can you tell I kind of get into something and like full bore, just focused?
No, I never would have guessed that, honestly. I never.
Right. So yeah, snowboarding took me on a wild journey. I think I went pro when I was maybe early 20s. I was able to actually make a little bit of an income as a professional snowboarder. I wasn't making real money, but I was actually getting paid to do something that I loved. And it was pretty wild. I got to travel. I got to compete. I did the X Games. I also had lots of injuries. I fell lots, and I broke bones and cracked ribs and all kinds of stuff.
You've traveled all over the world snowboarding, literally.
I did a lot of traveling, yes. It was a lot of fun. But there's still more of the world to explore. So I'm not done.
I don't even want to know what the next thing is for you, honestly. Well, I actually do. But let me just kind of recap here. Take your first flight at 15. You start taking flying lessons at 16. You get your private pilot's license. You're working on your IFR rating. Bad weather moves in. You get a job in a restaurant that has a snowboard shop. You become a snowboard instructor just after a couple weeks. And then 3 or 4 years later, you become pro snowboarder.
Wow, you're good. Yes, that was perfect.
I just want to make sure I got that. That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so you're a professional snowboarder, X Games, traveling all over the place, New Zealand, which is one place I would love to go, by the way. Travel all over the place, and then you had an incident. Something happened snowboarding.
Yes, actually, I had just done a snowboard contest in Big Bear, California, and I was in the finals, and I fell in the finals, so I ended up in 5th place, which I don't remember how much money I won, but it was something enough that I wanted to buy my friend's dinner. So we pulled over, and I was standing outside of the car looking for my wallet in the back of the car, and in that parking lot, another car backed up and pinned me between the 2 cars. It was a girl that was driving, and she was definitely on some drugs or something when she didn't realize that she was backing up and hitting me. So she kept reversing, and I think I was pinned there for, 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years, but for a long time. And luckily only one leg was pinned. And then I was banging on the car, and I had a friend with me, and she was banging on the car. And finally the driver saw what she did and then jumped in the car and took off.
Hit and run.
Full hit and run. There was no license plate on the car. There were cameras in the store there, but they weren't actually running. They weren't recording anything. Police never did find the person that did this, but it ended my snowboarding career. I think I was very, very lucky because I suffered ACL that was completely torn, an LCL that was partially torn, and then a compression fracture of the femoral head and tibia fibula.